Now we'll talk about some of the important tools which can be used for critical research and they emerge from the argumentation or rhetoric theories. In this regard, we can see Keen Pointner has focused that one of the important uh, tools in political argumentation can be the pragmatic argument. What is pragmatic argument? It's based on a causal relationship, a causal argumentation. That means cause and effect kind of argumentation, which evaluates political decisions, initiatives, and activities by pointing out their positive or negative effects. What kinds of positive effects can be gathered from a certain action, and what kind of negative impacts can accrue from that particular action, or what alternative action could have been there to mitigate the negative impacts or to enhance the positive impact. So this kind of debate is called causal argumentation or pragmatic argumentation. In his discussion further about this point, Keen Pointner has focused only on the positive version of pragmatic argument. For example, if he believes if an act A has some positive effects like B, C, D, E, etc., and has no or fewer or less number of negative effects than any other alternative act, for example, X. Therefore, we can say that Act A should be done and should be evaluated positively if, in simple words, an act has more positive possible effects than possible negative effects, and it is better than any other alternative act, then this act should be not only done, rather by the it is suggested that by the commentators it should be evaluated positively. Some critical questions, however, would still be asked about such pragmatic arguments. For example, does an Act A, which we are just referring to for an example, really have the effects B, C, and D? For that matter, we may say that does that act we're talking about, we need to see actually it has the positive effects we are referring to, or it is just an assumption. We need to see that before we call it a good action, or we propose it as a doable act. Then are those effects B, C, D really positive? If that action has those effects, तो क्या वो पॉजिटिव भी हैं कि नहीं? That's what we need to see. Or it's again just an assumption that these acts are positive. And then we need to ask a question. For example, does A really have no, fewer, or less important negative effects than any other alternative act? So we need to see what we are assuming, that it has lesser negative impacts. Is it true? We need to judge that also. And then, does Act A has further effects? Are there any other positive or negative effects than what we are assuming? So we need to see all these questions before relying on a certain pragmatic argument. Critical discourse studies has often take up such arguments, pragmatic arguments, as an analytical tool. And following the topical traditions which comes to us from Aristotle, argument schemes have been called topoi, and the list which more abstract lists of these topoi have been used, which comes to us from Aristotelian logic. Then, for example, following a discourse historical approach, Ruth Woodick and Martin Restell show that certain aspects of political argumentation, such as thematic threads in discourses on war, immigration, environment, can be profitably analyzed by using the context specific topos and pragmatic arguments. For example, we can find the topos of threat, topos of imminent danger, the topos of history, topos of economic usefulness, and topos of exploitation, and many more in order to interpret such texts. Figures of speech have also been used frequently, and some kind of verbal presentation of arguments. From Aristotle onwards, we have seen that metaphor has received much attention as a rhetorical figure, and this has recently been seen more as a kind of cognitive point, and for that matter, metaphors are seen more for their cognitive importance as compared to their apparent importance as a tool for embellishment. In more recent theories, its cognitive impact, which was already recognized by Aristotle, has been discussed by researchers, for example, such as Lakoff and Johnson. As conventional metaphors shape our reality, the contemporary or creative metaphors can also modify that reality. So metaphors are always develop as we change our versions of reality. And these have somehow a very clear argumentative value in various kinds of arguments, especially political arguments, and have been employed quite frequently by various researchers in the field of critical discourse analysis. This view can also be generalized for many of the traditional figures of speech. Metaphors can be chained, can be employed for more purposes, for cognitive things. Similarly, other figures of speech can be re-employed, can be reinvestigated for other reasons also. For example, metonymy, hyperbole, rhetorical questions, irony, and some of them have been explicitly designed as techniques of argumentation. For example, we see a concessio, which is to concede a point of minor importance, but still insisting on a major point which you don't want to concede. Then we have premonitio, to anticipate some kind of counter argument and prepare it in advance. Rhetorical figures can generally be seen as techniques for strategic maneuvering or a verbal presentation. In political argumentation, the strategic use of figures of speech has been made frequently in various analysis of political discourses by very prominent names in the field of critical discourse analysis. For example, Fairclough and Fairclough 2012, Woodek in 2011. So figure of speech can be an important tool to reach to the core of meaning in a political discourse. So therefore they can be decoded in order to understand the in-depth meaning of a political communication. Combining central concepts of critical discourse studies with historiography and corpus linguistics, John Flardew shows how the history of Hong Kong in the years before 1997 and afterwards can be described as a struggle for ideological hegemony through discursive means. In similar studies, he shows that rhetorical strategies such as the use of indexicals or certain figures of speech are important discursive devices in order to create a certain impact of some kind of hegemony or discursive hegemony, and in the employment of such figures of speech serve certain goals of discursive hegemony. For example, newspaper articles or political speeches are designed for specific purposes, and certain figures of speech can help speakers achieve those purposes. Then we can see that old trichotomy of tropes, which include figures of diction and figures of thought, are being replaced by more consistent and explicit typologies based on linguistic units, for example, phonemes, morphemes, phrases, clauses, sentences, etc., and for stylistic operations, for example, addition, deletion, substitution, and permutation. These are the techniques which are also being used in critical discourse studies to analyze various kinds of text, especially political text. So we can sum up that argumentation theories can be employed effectively to analyze text critically.